ANC Deputy President hopeful Ronald Lamola believes that the older generation should be barred from occupying leadership positions within the organization. Lamola is one of the leaders who has set his eyes on becoming the party's second in command. Well, Ziyanda Ngcobo is our colleague here at Newzroom Afrika, and she's about to get that conversation underway. Ziyanda, good morning to you. I wonder whether the Deputy President hopeful you're about to speak to is of the view, therefore, that his leader, who just turned 70 yesterday, by the way, should vacate office and not come back in Nasrec.
I tell you what, Koli, that's exactly where I'm going to be starting off my interview with Ronald Lamola today. And it's very interesting, Mr. Lamola, because you head up the legal and the constitutional affairs within the ANC. And you've said then, that the older generation, seems to be hogging or not wanting to let go of being in leadership positions. Let's just clarify that. I mean, Koli just said to me now that, your president turned 70 years old yesterday, so should he be vacating his position?
No, he shouldn't. Yeah, I have said it even before, that we need a generational mix, a mixture of the young and the old, and of various generations in the ANC. But obviously there must be a dominance of the younger generation, so that we can have that youthfulness, that youthful exuberance and energy that the older ones can then impart some kind of a knowledge. So the conference must find a balance between those generations.
So there is a formal proposal that has been put on the table to say that, those who are older than 65 years old, yes, they can become members, but not occupy leadership positions. What's your view on that? In light of the fact that the counter-argument for having a generational mix could be that, or some have even said that, it shouldn't be for the sake of just putting young people there, but are they experienced? What criteria needs to be put in place to ensure that the right leaders are actually elected, example, through the eye of the leader?
Yeah, the NEC meeting said that the election and the functions of electing the leadership should be a political function. It should not be a technical process through the constitution. So I think that members of the ANC in their majority across the country are young people. So they must do it through the elections, not through a technical process of the constitution. The constitutional amendments and the ones that the NEC has approved do not contain that aspect. The aspect that is you have seen is what is called in Section B. We are obliged that all the proposals that were timeously received must be tabled for record purposes to conference. But there are 32 constitutional amendments which does not contain the one related to the age, if you look in Annexure A. So in our view, and that is also my view, that the elections of leadership, young people in the ANC, if they want to see generational mix, they have the power, they are the majority, they must do it. It cannot be done through a technical process of the constitution.
Speaking of young people having the power, the ANC Youth League task team would have some semblance of power to nominate and elect, and that very same youthful structure, albeit may not having been elected per se, did not actually endorse you, someone who was a former leader of the Youth League. What is your assessment of that? Because you're saying they have the power, so why is it that the elder generation continues to be nominated?
I mean, the NEC today, I was not nominated by the Youth League even before, so it's not the first time. And I suspect it may not be the last. So the Youth League expressed their view as to how they see things going forward, which I have got no control of how they decide. They are an autonomous structure. But the key thing is that the conference will be decided by the 70% of the branches of the ANC countrywide, which is largely dominated by youthful members, which I do believe that they've played their role. And the indication across the country with what we have seen prior to the official closure and prior to the official opening of the nomination is that there is a yearning for a new generation, fresh blood across the country in the structures of the organization. And I must say that it is also a bit uncomfortable and painful for the younger generation like ourselves to be finding ourselves having to now contest for these positions with freedom fighters. And I think that is because we do not have a clear succession plan in the organization. If the ANC has a clear succession plan, where I know, and even previous generations of the younger generations like myself will know that this is the plan. We will know that there is a succession plan and this is where we're going. So I usually say that I look at my future in the structures by looking at those who came before me. I must look at Balula, I must look at Joma Shanganyi, I must look at Malusi Kigaba, I must look at Fipi Potkhipper, I must look at Vuiswa Tulelo, I must look at all those that came before me, Stephen Ngcobo and so forth, and say, this means this is my future. But I think if there's a clear succession plan in the organization, we will not find ourselves as this generation having to contest with the freedom fighters.
But then is that not an indictment of maybe perhaps what the youth has or has not done within the organization to take up space? It would seem that, you know, this talk of generational mix has only really been brought to the fore in this manner in the last 2 or 3 conferences. And you would have also been somebody who comes from the ranks, as I've already mentioned, of the ANC Youth League. Why is this so crucial now? Is it only because you're seeing that there are other parties, such as the EFF, that are actually attracting the youth? There is no succession plan, so what would your plan be then as well to attract young people?
Yes, we have done our part. I mean, I'm excited that now, going to conference, there will be a discussion on the succession plan. There is a Renewal Commission that is chaired by Comrade Togo Didiza that is beginning to bring the issue, including the document on organizational renewal, does raise the issue of succession planning so that the organization does not become stagnant. And we have always championed a younger generation. When I was a leader of the Youth League, we supported Comrade Balula. So there's not been a point where we took leave from this responsibility. We continue to do it even now in the ANC structures or in any other platform. We think it's important that the debate must continue. And it must become across very clear that there must be that balance of various generations, because as a result, we need that dominance of the younger generations coming with the fresh ideas and the creativity, innovation. But we also need the elders, some of them, to guide and mentor, because I also benefited a lot from the experiences of my other experienced colleagues, both in cabinet and in the ANC.
All right, let's just pause there for now, and Ngcobo, we'll just take a quick break. But when we return, I'll actually want to probe then Ronald Lamola on, besides being a young person, what he actually has to offer. I know that he's somebody who, in his capacity as minister, has also been dealing a lot with issues of land, and you'll know that that was one of the 2017 NASREC resolutions that needed to be implemented. So when we return, we'll be continuing our conversation with Deputy President Hopeful Ronald Lamola. Welcome back. We're still continuing our conversation with Deputy President Hopeful Ronald Lamola, as he is amongst the many leaders, in fact, that have their eyes set on that particular position. And just before the break, we were talking about how you've always championed, you know, young leaders and occupying top positions within the organization. But besides you being young, what is it that you actually have to offer, you know, especially in the top 6 structure as a Deputy President?
Yeah, thank you. I have run a legal practice. I've got something to show that on my own I could succeed in also my personal life. And with the privilege that I've been given in government, I have been able to turn around the 2 departments, and the annual reports of those departments are there to show that there is a turning point in terms of improvement for both Department of Justice and Correctional Services, including the National Prosecuting Authority, which we have also begun to turn it around, giving them resources, enabling them to appoint about 1,000 prosecutors in the last 3 years, and also giving them resources to deal with complex crime, organized crime, including corruption. And I think evidence is there for the counter to see that gradually they are beginning to be able to do their job free of any interference, without fear, favor, or prejudice from anyone. With correctional services, we have now ramped up the production across the country. In the farms of correctional services, the inmates are now able to produce, cook, and do on their own, including producing their own uniform, doing a lot of work in the factories. It has been ramped up, and that is in the annual report. You can touch it, you can see it. You can also go to the various centers and see. So I do believe that has given me an edge to understand the workings of government and that experience. And also in the ANC, where I've been given a task, I have done my part, as you said, on the land issue, where I was tasked to attend to the matter in terms of the committee. We took the matter from conference, where conference said we must put the expropriation without compensation as one of the instruments that government must be able to use to accelerate land reform. We took the process through in terms of the constitution. Unfortunately, there was no agreement in parliament, and therefore the bill could not pass. But we did not end there. As we speak now, there's an expropriation bill, which the ANC does not need any other political party, because we are a majority. It has gone through the National Assembly, which has identified certain parcels of lands that can be expropriated without compensation. It is now in the NCOP. It will soon become an act of this country. And also in the Department of Justice, we have put through the Land Court Bill, which will make, for the first time, the Land Claims Court a permanent court with permanent judges. It will also develop jurisprudence in terms of the land question. Also, the current administration is in the process of distributing about 700,000 hectares of land countrywide, which shows the commitment of the ANC to the land question.
The ANC may say it's committed, but others from the outside may not feel as such, especially when we're dealing with issues of corruption, both internally within the organization, but also within the government. So, for an example, the fact that the step-aside guidelines are actually a political football within the organization, some could argue that this shows that the organization and the people who occupy it are not serious about dealing with corruption. So you've mentioned all these great things about, the experience you've gotten and ramping up, the work of law enforcement agencies, but there's still that perception that the law enforcement agencies are being used for political gains. Now, this has ramifications for the unity of the organization. How would you deal with that, being the Justice Minister as well?
Yeah, the step-aside guideline was adopted, firstly, the resolution in Mangaung in 2012. Long before I was even a member of the, I was just a mere leader of the Youth League. So we did not bring this resolution. The members of the ANC countrywide felt it necessary to protect the integrity of the ANC by bringing that resolution. In Mangaung, and ourselves, we were there, but we lost. We supported Khalima. Resolutions came in. It's not us. The Nasrec conference said there was this resolution in Mangaung that we could not implement. We struggled to implement because it did not have clear guidelines. Conference then said, let's strengthen the resolution and put meat and some form of guidelines in terms of implementation. We as the NEC had to look at that resolution from Nasrec and say, how do we implement it? And there were some challenges with its implementation. From the beginning, you'll remember, it took us almost a year or two because we're grappling with how do we implement this resolution, particularly in the country where the Constitution says you are presumed innocent until proven guilty and so forth. But the resolution was very clear that it was not about guilty or not guilty. It was about protecting the integrity of the organization. Then the NEC said, let's put guidelines of how we implement the resolution. And that is what happened. And that's why guidelines were put in place and it was implemented. And in the implementation of any policy, in any country or in any democracy, there is always contestation. There's never been where you will find a policy is just implemented and there is no contestation. There will be contestation of interpretation, contestation of how and so forth. But we have learned from that contestation and also from the court judgment related to the Mahashule matter. Yes. So we are of the view that the guidelines have matured to a level where we are now able to say we now have precedent of how we may need to move forward with this matter. And I think from that experience, we will be able to continue to implement it in a fair and a transparent manner. And with regards to the
consistent in its application, because many have argued that yes, whilst the guidelines which were adopted by the NEC after lots of legal advice as well, that in its application to certain members it has not been fair.
No, it has been. There has not been a malicious intention from the NEC. In the implementation, the intention was very clear that it must be fair, it must be transparent to all members. But from time to time, you will find a loophole. And when there is a loophole, and that's why when you look even at the guidelines, even when the acting SG announced them, the guidelines, he said this is a living document because it was going to evolve. It's a novel matter. It's like the matter that the Palapala committee is dealing with. It's novel. Also, this was novel to us. We had to develop and build it and strengthen it as we move. It was not because it was targeted to anyone. It is because of the reality that when there is a loophole, you will need to close that loophole. Even in a country when there are laws, that's why you'll have precedents, you'll have the Concord developing laws. You'll also have judges differing in terms of how to interpret the law. It is not because it's a malicious intent against that person in front of the court. It's because of factually and also on an honest basis with a good intent, the person is implementing that policy or the facts. And with regards to the law enforcement agency, I mean, there has never been any proof from anyone that either myself or the president are interfering with the work of the NPA to direct them to prosecute this one or not to prosecute this one. What our role and what we have done was to give them the resources as they need in terms of with the National Treasury, but also in terms of human resource, in terms of technology and all the things that they need to do their job. And it ends there. We do not decide the case. We do not look at the laws. It is up to them to decide the case based on the facts and the law. And they are protected by the Constitution that they must prosecute without any fear, favor or prejudice. I can't tell the NPA who to prosecute or who not to prosecute. In fact, in terms of the NPA Act, it's a criminality to do that.
But what about the argument that's been made that the issue with this, in its current form, the step-aside guideline, is that you don't know how long a court matter will take, and in the meanwhile, somebody who could have contested may be prejudiced because a court case is taking 3 to 5 years to actually come to a conclusion, and that at the end of it, if somebody is actually found to have been innocent, they would have been put at a disadvantaged position.
Yeah, hence it was difficult to implement it from Mangaung. That was an argument that was brought to conference. But conference said, despite this issue, because anyone who is charged, it does affect the integrity of the organization. We need this resolution. And Nazareth said the same thing. But when you go to the guidelines, they've got a 6 months period of review of someone who has stepped aside. That within a period of 6 months, there must be a review to look at it and all those issues. But the other reality is that we obviously have to, in fact, it is in the interest even of all of us, ANC, EFF, DA, or anyone who is charged, that we strengthen law enforcement agencies. And that is what the work we are doing to help them, to strengthen them, so that whoever is charged, irrespective of whether it's a politician, a business person, or any member of society, at least if your matter it goes through, you get to know quickly whether you are guilty or not guilty. That will only function if the law enforcement agencies have been strengthened, they are able to deal with complex matters, and they can deal with them expeditiously. And that is where the work we need to do to ensure that whoever goes through the process, it is quicker and it is fast.
You mentioned more than once that, when you look at the process of how the step-aside came about since Mangaung, that it's mainly been about the integrity of the organization. Now, your organization, and when I say we, maybe even the country, is dealing with a situation where an incident at Palapala happened, where money was taken, but perhaps you as an ANC NEC member know better than the rest of us about what may have happened there after the president briefed you a weekend or two ago. But insofar as the organization being brought into disrepute, a draft report by the Integrity Commission has found as such. So if you are saying that this was the thinking behind the step aside, then shouldn't President Ramaphosa, of his own volition, spare the organization that cloud hanging over his head and him step aside?
Yeah, obviously from an organizational perspective, such a matter should be an outcome of process. And that's why the guideline is very clear.
What about political morality? You can deal with the legal process.
Yeah, and that's why the Integrity Committee is there, is to deal with such things. And even when you go into the guidelines, they are very clear. If there is any allegation of whatever nature that could bring the organization to disrepute, that person himself or herself must subject himself to that process. And I think that is what the president has done, firstly. Secondly, if you have been charged, that is what the guidelines say, you must step aside. There must not even be a need for you to go to the integrity, or you must on your own volition step aside. So I think where the matter is now in the organization is where it's now in front of the Integrity Commission, and we are awaiting the report. Once we have the report, the NEC will have a say of what should happen.
Do you think, as former President Mbeki has said, the organization should be preparing itself for any kind of eventuality, given that independent panel that's looking into whether or not the president could be facing impeachment, that parliamentary process, if the organization should be preparing itself for the possibility of any prima facie evidence being found that the president may have charges to face with regards to this Palapala incident?
The guidelines are there, as I've said, with regards to the step aside. We have prepared ourselves when we dealt with the guidelines, when we dealt with the other matters, which I said, they have now given us a clear picture of how to deal with any issue that needs the issues of the Integrity Committee or issues that relates to the guidelines. So the guidelines will guide us what to do when such an eventuality does happen.
Do you have any... what are your thoughts, rather, I should say, on the fact that going into this particular conference, you have a youth league that is basically not functional. You have a province such as the Free State and the Western Cape which haven't sat for their conferences. You also have a women's league that is a task team. When you look at the current state of the organization and the machinery, given the fact that going into 2024, you'd need a strong election machinery to prepare for that election. What is your assessment of why this is the case? Because there are some who believe, and we know in politics it's sometimes about perception, that this has been deliberate to allow and pave the way for someone like President Cyril Ramaphosa to actually ascend and get a second term.
No, it can't be deliberate. We did not invent COVID-19. There was COVID-19. The structures lapsed. Most of them, the ones you are referring to, they lapsed on the basis of the COVID-19 difficulty. Secondly, unfortunately, the Constitution did not have mechanisms of how do you deal with a lapsed structure. So we had to appoint an interim structures in all the places where those structures have lapsed. Some of them, you will know that most of the provinces and the regions that went through, they went through under very difficult circumstances and conditions just immediately after the COVID-19 period. It is not like there was an NEC that said there must be no structure on the basis or no basis. There were bases. The COVID-19 was a difficulty that the whole country faced. And we could not have had a situation where we have no conferences if there was no COVID-19 at the time. Some of them could have went through. But the reality is that that is what happened. And for example, with the Youth League, there were also other challenges, financially and so forth, now that we are facing as the organization. But there are other structures where there were organizational challenges that made them not to go to their conferences. But as we speak now, almost all of them, the Free State and the Northwest, they have gone through a process where they've reached a level of 70% in terms of the threshold to go to conferences, a decision that maybe may need to be taken, or they will go after conference. So it's clear that before, in the early part of next year, if they don't go now, if they're able to, they will. But if they can't, in the early part of next year, they will all go to their conferences and account to the membership and rebuild their organizations in their provinces. And I also suspect it's the same with the ANC Youth League.
Speaking of rebuilding the organization, there would obviously be certain qualities that each leader would have to bring to the table. So who would you actually be wanting to work with in the top 6? It's a valid question. You're talking about unity, you're talking about renewal, and yes, it would seem the trajectory has been rejecting slate politics, but in terms of you bring more, it would seem the legal side. But in this top 6, and you've spoken about young people as well occupying leadership positions, so who would be best to work with to ensure that 2024 the ANC has a decisive victory?
Yeah, I do think that with the nominations, it's clear that there is no appetite for slate politics. The structures across the country are rejecting slate politics. They want to look at a member on his or her strength and look at whether that person can go through the eye of the needle. I can state that I do think that I support the president. I think he must come back for a second term. I also wish to see many other younger generations in the structures coming through, like Dumiseni Ntuli, Fikile Mbalula, Phoebe Potgieter, David Masondo, and Vuyiswa Tulela, and many others that might have been nominated. But I just hope that in that top 6 there will be that good mixture of experience and a youthful exuberance that is needed to ensure that it propels the organization to go forward.
I mean, when we talk about that mix, there's quite a few people who seem to have been nominated for the position of deputy president. And interestingly, you'd also be going up against someone from the same province as you, the current deputy president of the organization, David Mabuza, amongst many. Do you feel that you're an underdog going into this conference?
Yeah, I think it's up to the structures to decide who they want to lead. As I said earlier on, if we had a clear succession plan as the organization, ourselves, the younger generation, will not be finding ourselves where we are, where we have to contest the freedom fighters and people who have made a serious contribution for the development of our country. We should be having a clear plan that this is where, in these 2 years, this is how it's going to move, and this is where you are going. And that's why I said, when I look at myself and other participants, I look at those who led the youth league before me, that where will I be in 10 or 15 years? So that is what I think this conference will help us with, the succession plan, how to move forward, so that there is a clear path for the organization also to be able not to be stagnant, but to benefit for the energy that is upcoming from its structure. So with that plan, I think we can be able to succeed. So I will leave it to the conference to decide who conference elect for whichever position. But I will avail myself if I'm called upon, because we have not yet been called by the Electoral Committee to be told whether we have made it or not. So we will wait for that moment, but if I'm called upon, I will definitely accept.
The ANC has often been accused of being inward-looking insofar as these elective conferences go, and are not actually looking towards what would be appealing to the South African public, which of course you would need insofar as being elected into the government. So you've spoken about this generational mix, but would that be enough to actually give you a fighting chance in 2024? But importantly, as deputy president, what exactly would you be doing in that role to ensure that you bring about that victory?
Yeah, the ANC does not exist for its own sake. It exists to resolve the societal challenges. So it is key that we are able to go to conference, speak about the energy crisis of the country, youth unemployment, the stagnant economy, and also the high level of crime. So I do think that if given a responsibility, these are the 4 important key issues that we will have to have come out of conference with a clear plan. What are we going to do, and what is the solution with regards to the energy crisis that is stagnating our economy, the issues related to the just transition, and how do we continue to use our natural endowment like coal. So it is a very important conference, and in the context of a church, it should be a revival. At the end of this conference, like when someone has went into a church, members of the ANC must come out feeling that they have made resolutions that will have an impact into the country, into crime, into unemployment, into the economy, and also into the energy crisis. But specifically also being responsive to the challenges that the youth is facing, which is a huge unemployment in the country. So I think if we get out of that conference with that message, even our members themselves will come out revived, they will come out rejuvenated, like any member of a church who has went into a revival.
Well, clearly no separation of church and the state with Deputy President hopeful Ronald Lamola, but certainly an endorsement for a second term for President Cyril Ramaphosa, it would seem, from Lamola. So will he be working closely with the 70-year-old Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa? We'll see at the end of the 51st National Conference in December. Xoli?
Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much. All right, so that's the view of the ANC Deputy President hopeful, Ronald Lamola. He says there's no clear succession plan in the party. And you will know also that there are those who suggest people in the ANC don't have alternatives except to work for government. There are those who argue in that way. But Ronald Lamola says, well, to prove that I could do it on my own, I established my own legal practice. So is that something that gives you hope that he is someone that could potentially be a good leader? You make up your mind.